Hello, everybody. Today we discuss blended finance, economic views on the environment, ecological economics, the pros and cons of working in academia, and what sustainability can mean, since not everybody agrees on the meaning of sustainability. So in this conversation, we talk with Merle Schulken. Enjoy the conversation and let us know what your favorite part of it was. Hey Merle, thank you so much for joining me. How have you been?
Hello, good to see you. I've been very good. I'm very happy to be here and very excited for what you're going to ask me.
So I guess let's just start at the beginning. How did your journey in economics start?
How did my journey in economics start? Well, I had some econ in high school, but it was not very extensive. And then I chose to go to Amsterdam, to the Netherlands, for my undergraduate studies. I did a program called Politics, Psychology, Law and Economics, short PPLE, which I thought back then just kind of encompassed everything I was interested in. But I also thought it was just, it was a really new degree, had an interdisciplinary approach, very like problem oriented, like problem centered rather than like discipline centered, which I thought was amazing. And so I started with that. The first year had sort of like all 4 PPLE disciplines, like introductory courses, also philosophy of science, just methods courses. I think it was really a great introduction to just social sciences. And then really from this like social science perspective, I chose to major in economics and business, which is then what I had most of my classes in for the like following 2 years. And that was then more like neoclassical, just, you know, what you study in a regular economics bachelor's degree sort of stuff. But I would say like my journey into economics started from a social science perspective, from the other PPLE disciplines perspective, from the program as a whole. And then I went into just this neoclassical econ major.
Okay, so what is the difference between discipline education and problem-centered education? Like, how was problem-centered education different?
What I really liked about PPLE was that like the whole idea of starting the program, I believe it was actually started by the law faculty, funnily enough. They had this idea of like, we need to train good lawyers and judges, but they need to be able to see beyond how like the law is usually taught. They need to be able to understand the underlying problems that then come up in court cases, for example. And I think that's really valuable, and that should really apply to any social science discipline, right? Like, of course, it's important to understand your discipline's history, the big names in your discipline, the theories in your discipline, right? You don't want to reinvent the wheel whenever you look at the world. It's important to be part of a tradition, to get methodological training so that you can also talk to the other researchers in that field, and you have like sort of like division of labor with them. But I think science has this problem sometimes where it's too inward looking, you know, where you look more at, is there a gap in the literature in my field that I feel attached to, and can I answer that gap, rather than thinking, how do I see the world? You know, like what am I seeing in my everyday life, and what kind of questions would I want to pose, and who can give me answers to that, and what methods, what theories are useful for giving me an answer to that. And I thought for bachelor's education, that was really like the second way was really good and motivating to a young student to understand, like, we're not just doing this so that you can get a degree and say, well, I'm an economist now, but like we're doing this to really answer pressing social questions.
That's really cool. So, but then you went into you majored in economics. So why did you choose economics if you had so many options? Why that one? And then from that point on, was it what you expected, or was it very different from how you expected economics to be?
Well, the major was economics and business. I have to qualify. It was really only half economics. I actually didn't mind the business part, I have to say. The major, well, why did I choose it? So I remember I was just really interested in the topic of the economy, like how it works. I wanted to understand the news in the economic section of the newspaper. So I thought, well, you know, if I want to be able to talk about these things, I should do economics. Also with the idea of kind of wanting to be taken seriously. I thought, like, I never want to be a woman that people tell, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about, she doesn't understand the math or so. So I thought, well, you know, like if this is what it takes to enter this field, to be able to have these conversations about what was happening in Greece at the time, about monetary policy, about inequality, about climate change, then I thought I'll do the whole thing. I was aware of like sort of the philosophy of science underlying economics. I didn't always think it was the most interesting way to look at the world, but I also really liked the quantitative approach. I wanted to just get a deeper statistics and econometrics training. I thought that was really useful, and I did like the modeling way of thinking about problems, not just saying, well, you know, this is an influencing factor and this is an influencing factor, but trying to then combine, well, how might these two factors actually factor in together at the same time, and what might be like a more complex outcome from that. I thought that was also really cool. And was it how I expected it to be? I mean, I'd had an econ introduction course in the first year, so I knew what I was getting into. It did leave a lot of questions open for me, like, you know, is there always going to be economic growth? Do we need economic growth always? What about environmental problems? What about how the economy really works? Like, I thought money in banking was maybe the most interesting class because we actually talked about how the global financial system works, but I was missing a lot of that in like microeconomics and macroeconomics, even though they try to make it as like applicable to the real world as possible. So, I mean, yeah, it did leave some desires open in a way. Yeah.
So how did you deal with that? Like, how did you work with that? Did you know that there were pluralistic courses, or was that a whole different aspect? How did that go?
Well, I was at the University of Amsterdam, and there just wasn't that much heterodox economics you could take at the university, at least that I was aware of. I did take some additional courses outside of my my bachelor's. I did go to some Rethinking Economics talks, but I have to admit that I was not like super into fighting for heterodox economics from the start or so. You know, I had the other PPLE disciplines. I had friends who were in those disciplines who helped me see, you know, whenever I thought, well, but this is just how the world works, right? And they say, no, it's not. Not every society is organized as a market society. And I was like, oh, okay, give me readings, I'll read them. You know, so it was really more in an exchange with the other social science disciplines that I came to the topics in economics I was interested in, rather than engaging with heterodox economists. Yeah, which maybe I should have done earlier. But.
So what are the topics that you're interested in
Today? In general? Well, I remember I was interested in finance, in money, in banking, like what money is, how does it work, how does our financial system impact broader economic outcomes like inequality, like economic growth, like stability, financial crisis. That was really like a driver early on, and at the same time, I was really interested in sustainability, and just this like obviously, I mean, climate change, like there's massive threats, but then also yeah, all these other environmental issues that I felt like were all in the end tied to how we live, how we do economics. And I always thought, like, you know, I always like to think of it in terms of systems, right? And I always thought, like, how can we fix this system? Like, what are these drivers that are making this go so wrong at the moment? And wouldn't there, yeah, to change the structure somehow so that it isn't so self-destructive? Yeah, I think those were like topics that were interesting from very early on.
Okay, so with that, after your bachelor, like, where did you go from there?
So during my bachelor's, which is maybe also sort of a PPLE thing, I felt like people chose these like topics they were interested in really early on. Like I remember in the second year, everyone was trying to, like in a program so broad, sort of trying to find their niche. And I went to this talk in this additional course I was doing on climate change that was about green bonds and climate bonds and how that could contribute to sustainability. And so I just thought, well, you know, I like finance, I like talking about money, and I like sustainability. So, you know, this is it. This will just be my topic. And so after PPLE, I decided to do some internships for a year before choosing a master's, because I felt like on this field of sustainable finance, there was a lot going on outside of academia that I wanted to see before I decide what I want to do in that, you know, like what role I want to play. And so what I did is first I did an internship at a private firm in Amsterdam. It was like a, would you want me to explain what these internships are about? Yeah, okay. I don't want to bore you. Well, so the first firm was like a private firm in Amsterdam, sort of like medium-sized firm, who focused on impact investments, which is like it's basically trying to allocate capital in a way that is conscious of, like, you know, what our societies needs. For example, the Sustainable Development Goals. How can we invest in firms and in projects that directly tailored to the Sustainable Development Goals? That's impact investment. And so they were focusing on institutional investors, which I thought was really interesting, because that's like the big money, pension funds, insurances, like sort of firms that invest the money of a lot of people, and they are governed by public regulation, and they also have a very particular way internally of how they assess projects, whether they're worth investing in, whether they are even able to invest in them. And so what was really cool about this firm was that people who have founded it had worked at those institutional investors and knew the language and knew the logic, and were now trying to help those firms do more within sort of the framework that they were in with the capital they were investing. So that was really interesting. And in the course of that internship, I was there for 5 months. I learned about a thing called blended finance, which is basically when whenever a project is maybe impactful in some sort of way, maybe it's good for the climate, maybe it's a social project, but for some reason it's either too risky or the profit is too low, or just it's like a sort of asset that an institutional investor wouldn't want to invest in, then sometimes there's these attempts between the public and the private sector to work together to make this investment attractive. So the public sector might co-invest with the private investor. They might take a riskier share, like a riskier tranche of that asset. They might make a guarantee to the private investor that they would account for a certain amount of losses if there were to be losses. It's like really, I just thought it was interesting, this cooperation between public and the private sector. And so when I was done with my first internship, I decided I wanted to see the public side of things. And I went to the European Investment Bank in Luxembourg, to the blended finance division. So this, like, using money that was given in donations by European member states in foreign development aid, and using that to blend with like financing from the European Investment Bank through their traditional investments, and or like the, you know, where they have like a sort of like risk requirement or profit requirement, and also trying to blend in like private sector money. So I was there for another 4 months, kind of saw how big institution like that works, and how just learned more about the European Investment Bank in general as an institution, its mandate, how it's governed, like all these things. It was really interesting. And then I went for my third internship, which was in research at the Max Planck Institute for the Study of Societies in Cologne. And I was really lucky because there was a professor there called Benjamin Braun, who actually researched something called what he calls asset manager capitalism. So kind of like the current form of capitalism and the role of finance in that form of capitalism from a like social science perspective, so really political economy, as I said. And he just kind of allowed me for 2 months to work on sustainable finance, on this new like sustainability taxonomy that was coming out, that was being developed in the EU, and basically the political economy of how this taxonomy was being developed. So I saw sort of like private sector, public sector, and research around this like very specific issue of sustainable finance, and yeah, kind of like took a deep dive into that topic for a year.
That's such an interesting way of doing this, or going about this as well, to figure out what you want to do. So, but I was wondering though, what is taxonomy?
Taxonomy.
What is that?
That's this EU project they have where they say we want to orient our economy, our policies towards sustainability, but there's not even agreement on what sustainability means in like certain sectors or certain industries, right? And so they try to streamline these discussions by creating this taxonomy with an expert group, and yeah, kind of like giving guidelines of how you can do reporting on sustainability efforts.
So what do you mean there's no, like, not everybody thinks sustainability means the same thing?
Yeah, because for example, if you look at the clothing sector, the clothes industry, there's there's an option to try to go for reusing clothing. There's an option to go for recycling clothing, and there's the idea of like avoiding waste altogether, right? So for certain industries, what is your standard of this is a sustainability company versus like this is greenwashing or or this is like sort of the status quo, business as usual sort of company. That is like, that really depends on the standard in the industry as a whole, but it also depends on the materials you're using, how ecologically harmful they are, how scarce they are, what social impact they have when they're being produced. Yeah, so I think this taxonomy is really trying to give some guidance in that direction.
So after your 3 internships, what did you do? How did you decide on finding the right master for you?
That was so difficult. If you're currently trying to decide what masters to do, taking a year between bachelor's and masters doesn't make things more easy and more clear, I think. Yeah, so of course the idea next to doing these internships and learning about sustainable finance was trying to find out what I want to do, right? And yeah, I'd never, when I was in my bachelor's, I never thought I wanted to go into research. I always thought I want to go do stuff, change the world in practice. But while I was out there changing the world in practice, while I was working, I thought more about, well, one, the tasks you do on a daily basis, and what I actually enjoy doing on a daily basis. And then I realized that actually many things related to being in academia suit me very well. Then I also thought much more critically kind of about this whole sustainable finance thing. And I reflected on what do I know from my bachelor's, what kind of things do I not know? And what kind of things would I still want to know to understand better some of these things I was seeing during my internships. And what I realized there was that sort of like going for sustainable finance and this hope for being able to combine my interest for finance and my interest for sustainability, I was very limited in my viewpoint of what could be changed in the world when I was in my bachelor's. I felt very like under pressure to just find a solution, to like, it seemed like climate change was such a big issue. There must be like some solution that I can just work towards, But what I realized during my internships is that this idea of like wanting a quick solution, and also maybe my econ background, it locked me into a worldview that where I was missing some structures behind the things. And yeah, I realized that during my internships, I had so many questions like, well, why are these big investors interested in investing money in these certain projects? Do they have anything else to invest money in? Like, why this drive? Why certain asset classes? What does this have to do with like financial stability? What is like how does even money work, and how does financing work, and also economic growth. That was another thing where I was just reading on the side and trying to find out, is economic growth environmentally feasible? Is there even a way to make growth green and smart? And I was getting more and more skeptical of that, also while talking to my colleagues at the European Investment Bank. And so I felt like there's this like biophysical dimension to this whole issue that I was missing. There was this like social science dimension to, why are we even doing this? You know, why do we need to keep striving for growth? How does our capitalist system really work? You know, it's political economy dimension. I was missing that. And so I decided in the end to do a master's that would combine my desire to maybe go into academia. That would be, once again, a very like content theory focused degree, and something that would take a really critical perspective. And I settled on SEEP, Socio-Ecological Economics and Policy, at the University of Economics and Business in Vienna, which is what I'm doing right now.
So why this one? What was it about this one that you're like, this is the right one with what I want to do?
Well, I mean, while I was reading, I was also trying to understand sort of what are the different fields of heterodox economics that are even dealing with these questions that I have on my mind. And I found out that, well, ecological economics is maybe the best fit. Vienna also had a working group working on sustainable finance, which was, that was cool. And I liked the courses in this master's. It was sort of, I mean, it was really a difficult trade-off though. I mean, I applied to so many different masters and had to decide between a lot of them in the end. Happens if you just keep applying to everything you find interesting. No, I'm kidding, but it was really the choice between, do I want to do a more public policy oriented degree at maybe a more like fancy university with good contacts, and which is what a lot of my classmates were doing after PPLE, to then prepare to go into the public sector or NGO work or private sector work with a really applied focus. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted this like theoretical, critical stance. Then there was the idea of just doing a new classical economics master's to allow me to get into positions like the macroeconomics research group at the European Investment Bank, or to, you know, to influence the field sort of from within, and also to get a really good quantitative methodological training. But then I thought, I mean, there's some people who say just go for methods and choose the theory yourself, right? Like the most important thing is that you get good methods in your education. And I mean, there's maybe something to that. It's definitely hard to teach yourself methods, but at the same time, I spent for an entire year, I tried for an entire year between my bachelor's and master's to find the sort of readings that I am reading now in my master's. And I can just say, I think it's really hard if you don't have an overview over a field that you might want to get into, to find all the like seminal texts that are important to put the things together. So yeah, in that sense, my master's has been very valuable as well.
Okay, so wow. So a little bit back, you said that there were things about being an academic that you liked a lot. So what are like certain things about academia that you're like, this is why I like it so much, or this is why it's different from other kinds of paths I could have taken?
Well, I don't think I could really answer the question, probably because I'm not actually working in academia yet. I mean, I'm still studying, and we'll see, right? Like if I, once I'm doing my PhD, if I really like it that much, I don't know. But in my mind, things that I would like to do is, I like this idea of like lifelong learning and having the time to do that. There's just so many open questions I still have. I like research. I like this idea of getting to the bottom of things. And I realized just that in the private and public sector, there isn't always time for that. You sort of have a belief about the world. And if you are interested and if you're good, you keep reading up also on academic literature on how that belief should maybe be changing. But there isn't time in your everyday life to discuss in detail, you know, why are we doing this? Like, what's the purpose of this specific thing? You really have to weigh between your time investment and like how much impact those really going to generate, or how much money you can really make with it. So I like this idea of having the time to get into stuff, of being paid to do that. And I like the idea of teaching, academia, there's also so many things that I don't like, right? Like no job stability, the pressure to publish, awful pay sometimes. So it's not all great, but I'm not naive. I've heard a lot from people say academia is so much more elbow fighting than you think it would be. It's so competitive. But I think technically what you're being paid to do in academia is to research with other people, right? To bring knowledge into the world in collaboration with other researchers. You are supposed to write good peer reviews. You are supposed to teach, to be engaged with students. And I think these are all things I would really like to do. So hopefully it will work out.
Fingers crossed. So now that you study heterodox thinking, do you see that too? Do you see different schools of thought of economics coming together, or are they still like standing alone, separate from each other, even though you learn them in one master?
Well, my master's is a very specific type of heterodox economics or socioeconomics. It's ecological economics with a focus on social ecological economics, which is a subdiscipline within ecological economics. So I have to admit that is what I've mostly been focusing on. Of course, I saw some post-Keynesian economics. We also did a lot of classical economics again, but some institutional economics, complexity economics, evolutionary economics. But I am in no way an expert. Like, I've not done a master's degree, so to say, on heterodox economics. But I do think that I see how different just social science disciplines come together clearer, and I also see indeed the differences between different schools of economic thought. I can really recommend the website Exploring Economics, I think that's what it's called, to give an overview of like different definitions of different schools of economics for people who are confused about certain schools.
Yeah, because I was wondering about this. You have ecological economics, environmental economics, and now you also mentioned evolutionary economics. Like, how do you separate those?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Well, I can maybe try to explain ecological economics if that helps. So, because that was also something that was really an important realization for me to make as someone with like an econ background trying to find her way into sustainability related research. So the way it works is you had since the 1970s, 80s, basically, you had ecology on one hand, like natural science, combining like different natural sciences, biology, evolutionary theory, some chemistry, I guess. I don't know that much about it, but who really started thinking in terms of systems, ecosystems, how do they function, how do they change, are they sustainable, etc. And so that came up, that field. Then you had environmental economics coming up as a field, which was, environmental economics is really the study of evaluating sort of mainstream environmental policies for their economic and for their environmental impact. So what they do a lot is you look at, for example, a carbon tax, you look at a tariff, at a quota, a ban or something on some sort of environmentally harmful thing, and you try to assess, okay, how does this affect prices? How do these prices affect extraction rates? Is this, like, how do they affect grander sustainability issues? It's a lot a question about, like, it has, this is like my, one of my professors, Clive Spash, wrote a paper trying to distinguish the different schools. What he says is basically that environmental economics has very much in common with mainstream orthodox economics in that it sees the market as given, the price system as given. It is about how to internalize externalities within this price system, how to basically fix the market, about and thereby it takes like a utilitarian approach to ethics. The idea is like, you know, the more we can extract while being sustainable, the better. It's about economic growth a lot of times, to do that in an environmentally like less harmful way. It has a lot of discussions about like discounting between current and future generations. It is very maths heavy. It takes a sort of formalistic approach to things, like very positive approach, a positivistic approach to science as well. So that's environmental economics. Ecological economics, on the other hand. Oh, and another thing is, so environmental economists think of nature as like natural capital. And the idea is that there is some amount of like substitutability between natural capital, so like a forest, for example, or like minerals in the ground, and human-made capital. So the idea is like for the development of a country, for economic growth, you can cut down some forest if you then rebuild roads and infrastructure with that forest. So ecological economics is much more skeptical of this substitutability hypothesis. The idea is that natural capital is not infinitely replaceable with man-made capital, not for economic growth, but just not for society as a whole. Ecological economics thinks much more, that's where it brings together like ecology and heterodox socioeconomics. It thinks in ecosystems. The idea is that at least at the current rate at which we are degrading our environment, we are using up resources. We are polluting beyond planetary boundaries, and there is these actual boundaries, and you cannot just replace one part of an ecosystem with another part of an ecosystem on the other end of the world. But you can't cut down forest here and then just build another forest there and it will even out, because ecosystems are complex. And so the idea is that there is like limited substitutability of natural with human-made capital. The idea is that our economic system and our social system is part of this larger biosphere, and we need to watch out with every single resource and every single flow of energies and materials into and out of that system, how it affects the ecosystem. And we need to find a way of structuring our societies, of structuring our economies such that we can fit into these ecosystems as best as possible, such that we prevent disastrous climate change, but also other planetary boundaries that have been flagged by natural scientists, like biodiversity, like ocean acidification, like the nitrogen and phosphate, I think, cycles. All these things that are basically keeping our environment safe for us at the moment. The idea is to, rather than change that environment and fly to Mars and live there, to try to fit into these boundaries. And in that sense, ecological economics is also, at least social ecological economics, the part that I'm doing now, is it's not utilitarian in a sense that it just presupposes this ethics, but it is like sensitive that there is different values at different part of the decision-making process, and for different cultures, and that and for different problems. It is it basically is much more interdisciplinary than environmental economics or other strands of ecological economics as well, and that it works together with political science, sociology, social psychology, different fields, to understand what is this thing that we call the economy, how does it actually work, and how is it changing, and how does it affect the biophysical sphere around us. So it takes basically like this institutional economics perspective to environmental issues, really thinking of, for example, the issue of climate change or biodiversity loss, not as like isolated environmental policy problems, but as really being like rooted in core, the modes in which we produce and consume and invest, and really like rooted in how we do our society and how we do economics today. And these are sort of like the big two fields.
So then, but how does this specializing in socio-ecological economics, is that different than from ecological economics? How is that a different approach then?
Yeah, the last part I was trying to explain is really the social ecological economics. Well, I mean, ecological economics also emerged in the 1980s as a field. It has like a journal, it has its own association, but it is like, you know, like so many heterodox economics fields, it has its internal debates. And what Clive Spash says is that there's kind of three camps. One, he calls the new resource economists. So that's people who work with mainstream economic models, who work with the price system, who talk about externalities, about, what I was trying to explain before, who see markets as given, use this formalistic approach. Then there is others that are the social ecological economists, which is, you know, what I'm studying here, who take like a socioeconomics approach to looking at the economic system as like a system of institutions, of social structures that are socially created, that could be changed. It's much more interdisciplinary. And then there's this third camp he calls the environmental pragmatists, which is kind of people who are very like activist, policy oriented, and they'll use whatever framework works to get political traction. So if they need to talk in terms of like prices and like, oh, look, this is how much ecosystem services are worth every year, just so that policymakers listen to them, they'll do that. But they might adopt a different approach in another study. So yeah, that's kind of how he categorizes the three different fields. And there is some discussion between these fields about what ecological economics should be, etc. But yeah, here in Vienna, it's social ecological economics. So really rooted in social sciences. Yeah.
So you're in Vienna, you studied in Amsterdam, now you're studying in Vienna. How is it different to study there from?
It is different. I mean, it's also bachelor's and master's, so just different phases of life in general. But it's really different cities. And I have to say, I like being in Vienna. I loved Amsterdam. It was like the perfect place for me to go at the age of 18. But Vienna is nice too. They have a great history here of socialist city politics, Red Vienna in the 1920s. And a lot of that also goes into the teaching here. So that's really interesting if you're interested in learning about social movements, about social housing, about, it really feels like also just the feel here, like there's so much more, in comparison to Amsterdam, there's so much more public space that you can use. There's a lot of activism here. That's really interesting. It's very green. It's a lot cheaper to live here as well than in Amsterdam. Just feels like a bit slower as well. You know, like it's like more of enjoying more of the good life, less of the rushing, which is sometimes frustrating to me because I like to rush sometimes. But yeah, it's definitely different. I guess that would be the same for everyone who moves cities within Europe. It's really great what sort of regional diversity we have.
That's so cool. So one question that did come up for me though, when I was listening to you talk about ecological and environmental, so basically the big differences are based on the assumptions that they make, like from the start then. But yes. Do you learn these assumptions, or are these assumptions like a given and then you don't question them? Do you think that's part of the problem? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the perspective they take here at the Masters in Vienna is that a lot of it comes down to philosophy of science. And that's also the reason why in SEEP, in the first semester, you have another course in philosophy of science that kind of deals with this idea of how was science done in the past? How is science being done today? Why do different scientific disciplines do what they do? What sort of assumptions, but also just like methods, and like what sort of tradition is neoclassical economics coming from? What traditions are other heterodox schools coming from? I think that this is definitely part of the misunderstanding also between different schools of economic thought. So, I mean, I really wish more people had philosophy of science in the beginning of their studies. I had it in Amsterdam, and then again here at the beginning of the master's. It was really, I think it's really enriching. But is that the only part of the problem? No, I don't think so. I think there's also a lot of vested interest in keeping a certain part of economics dominant that doesn't problematize power structures that are keeping the current unsustainable mode of production of living intact. I think it's more complex than just saying, oh, we're misunderstanding each other. But it would be a start for sure.
Okay, so what are your plans for economics or after your master's?
I think I will stick to this topic of sustainable finance that I'm so interested in. There is within ecological economics this field called ecological macroeconomics that focuses on, well, yeah, macroeconomics, but also especially issues of money and finance. And yeah, for me, it's really this interesting question of like, how is our current financial system contributing to sustainability issues, but how might it also be part of a change for the better? And yeah, so that broader field of ecological macroeconomics, I would like to go into, combined with sort of like a institutional economics perspective, because in the end, well, my background is in social sciences. I want to learn more about modeling as well. And I definitely have a lot more quantitative methods courses coming from you this semester. But in the end, I think I will always be a political economist more than like a computer nerd programming big models. So concretely, what I'll do is I might do another one-year master's, not because this current master's wasn't enough, or so I think it's a great preparation also for PhD or for work, but just because this topic of financial systems and financial reforms and central banking, and there is other places where I could learn a bit more on that, I think, and then I would try to work on a PhD proposal and then see, you know, if that is something I end up doing, or if I end up doing a traineeship maybe at somewhere like in central banking, or go back to the European Investment Bank, who knows, or work for a think tank, for an NGO, and more in practice, I could see that too. But for now, I think the plan is to try and get into a PhD.
So, and then next to that, what are your ideas about how economics should change or could change to be better suited for the world we're in or we're going for?
Yeah, well, it's kind of hard for me to say because I feel like I'm not even properly within economics anymore. With socioeconomics being really close also to sociology, to political economy and ecology here. But what I could wish, I wish more economists were aware that there is other social sciences, that economics is one social science, but that there's others, and to seek them out, to engage, because it's very easy to get locked into one worldview that is very pragmatic, that thinks that this is how the world works, but it being locked into one view of what science should do, how the world works, what the important questions are, what is possible in terms of change, that really limits what questions you ask. And I think for the changes we need to see, we need to ask bigger questions than just how can we, you know, introduce the optimal carbon tax. It's not about that alone. I mean, it's also about things like that, but not alone. And that is not to say that you need to be able to do all social sciences, not at all. Like, specializing eventually is very important. And if you are a person that likes to do applied economics, so you know, quantitative methods, if you're a person that likes to do modeling, by all means, you know, that's very important and that's great work. But I think just being aware that there's more out there, like confusing yourself first and then finding how can you contribute, that would be great. And I think if more economists were trained in that way, if economists that are currently big names in the field would engage more with these sort of thoughts, yeah, the field could be doing a lot more great things than it is doing today.
That sounds really great. So I heard that you were also part of or active with this organization called Degrowth. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Absolutely. So that was also one of the other great things for me coming to Vienna, is that what I was mentioning before briefly, there is so much activism going on here. And there is a lot of people here who sort of combine also academia with activism, who manage to navigate this field of like tension between you want to be objective or you want to, you want to be rigorous and everything, but at the same time you want to be asking relevant questions, you want to be engaged in change, you want that your knowledge is used. And there's just been a lot of really interesting people I met here who I think manage amazingly to keep this balance. And yeah, degrowth is, it's a movement, I would say, pretty recent one as well, maybe like 2008 or so. That like I don't actually know when they had their first conference, but it's a movement that is critical of the way in which the current economic system and social system that we have needs economic growth to be stable and to reach societal goals like employment, fairness and stuff. And it's critical of this growth drive, not in a sense that it's about like, we want economic recession tomorrow, like that's really not the goal at all. But it is more looking at the current system in this structural way of like, okay, why are we required to preserve economic growth at all costs, and how could we change that? Because economic growth, I mean, it's a debate. Can we grow our economies and be sustainable? I don't want to get into that here, but I think there is good evidence that we cannot, at least at the current moment. It's never been done, and there are many details if you get into like, well, but we could have more like service sector, and that's less environmentally impactful. There's really interesting papers on evaluating why economic growth acceleration often comes with environmental issues, and currently also comes with social issues, where we need to ask ourselves, is that really the policy goal we want to be focusing on, or is there a way how we can prioritize social and environmental goals before economic growth, like prioritize them directly? And well, the current system we can't, because everything from financial stability to employment to, well, the security of your pensions, right, is linked to the economy growing. And I think degrowth is this really interesting movement combining academics, combining activists, that is very capitalist critic, that takes this this normative stance towards ecological sustainability and social justice, and also looks at north-south relations, and yeah, that has like, I think, a really like interesting direction of thought. So I'm engaged in that in a sense that I helped organize a conference that unfortunately had to take place online in May. That was still for a university project, so I actually had to do it. But and then I got involved also more in terms of what they're doing here locally, but also conceptually bringing together discussions within that field on what the strategy for the field should be. So we're going to publish a book next year, which is really cool, and I'm going to be one of the editors. But it's really just one example of a really cool movement within like ecological economics, or this intersection between social science and ecological issues. There's many others, and yeah, I would highly encourage people to, if there's anything in your surroundings, like rethinking economics, like a degrowth chapter, like system change, not climate change, Fridays for Future, whatever, to see if it fits with what you think and to get engaged. I think it's really rewarding also next to your studies to do that.
So what about this book? What is it about? Do you have a name yet? Anything?
Well, the title is going to be Degrowth and Strategies. And it's basically about, I mean, degrowth being a movement has so far been very academic. It's been a lot about organizing international conferences, and it has also has some activist things going on, a lot of activists in there, but it hasn't so far talked a lot about what is our strategy as a movement, who are we, what do we do, why do we do it. And interesting also is that degrowth currently unites a lot of like different strategies for change. I mean, from like people who are more about reform to people who say, no, you need to build counter institutions to the current system. And there's different understandings of what strategy to prioritize in a certain situation. And I think it's really important that we are, as a movement, having this discussion now, like of who are we, what is our strategy, but also what are the things that we advocate for and why. And maybe sometimes these strategies are not compatible even, and that is okay, but you need to realize that before it fragments your movement, as happens so often on the left, unfortunately. So the hope with this publication would be to kickstart this discussion about strategy and to sort out some of the differences and to find sort of ways how we can evaluate, well, in this context, maybe this strategy is more important for us as a movement. In this context, another strategy, and yeah, to have sort of this internal discussion.
Wow, that's fascinating.
So I think every movement has to deal with that at some point. I heard Fridays for Future has to deal with it at the moment. I mean, it's
but it seems hard. Like, how do you figure that out? Like, how do you figure out this is what we stand for, even though these 2 points don't really fit together? We still believe in both. Like, how do you go about dealing with that?
Yeah, that's indeed the question. But I think well, what's really nice about degrowth is that there's so much scholarship already out there. I mean, if you're interested in degrowth, for example, you can check out degrowth.info. They even had a series already, a blog series on strategies where different academics in the field gave like a short summary of a certain way to look at strategy. And so I think that's also the strength of left movements. I mean, sometimes I feel like it's disheartening to see the rise of the far right and to feel so powerless. Like you feel like, I mean, there is a lot of these left movements, but how can we make ourselves heard? How can we stand together? How can we really affect change? But I think there's also so many qualities within the left movement of coming to consensus, to have discussions in a like open and constructive way. And I really hope that exactly this like book can also make a contribution there, because yeah, there is conflict sometimes, but in the end, as you said, it's mostly a shared goal, and there's so much really amazing change already happening out there. So yeah, I don't even know what I wanted to say now, but I definitely think it's possible to have this discussion in a constructive way, because I see it happening everywhere, and it's really interesting.
Awesome. So let's do a little lightning round. I'm going to ask you questions and just say the first thing that pops up in your head, okay?
Sure.
Okay. What is a skill any economist should learn?
Empathy.
Who do you admire or look up to in economics?
Oh, I'm not going to even say any certain name, that would be insane, but anyone who until old age manages to be critical of even their own life's work, and who is dedicated to teaching young economists and to being engaged in public debates. And yeah, whether, I mean, you want to say Stieglitz or some of my professors here, Sigrid Stagel, Clive Spash, Andreas Novi, I really like those. But also even like some younger researchers who taught me in my undergraduate, who really dedicated time to teaching students and to being open to debate. I really admire all those people.
What is a question you want me to ask that I haven't asked you yet?
Are you happy with what you're doing, maybe? Like, are you happy? I am happy. I'm happy now. Yeah.
Are you happy?
I'm happy now, yeah. It's not always easy, but I would also definitely always encourage people to, if you feel like the thing that you're studying right now or the place you're in if you feel like there is questions you have and there's no answer to them, and you think maybe I'm just stupid, you know, like maybe this is not even a relevant question, or there's so much I'm not seeing yet, don't feel disheartened. Like, keep looking. There's places where people are working on those questions, and there's a community, and yeah, find that community and join them. I think it makes life a lot easier as compared to trying to go with the mainstream and be the lone fighter with all her lonely questions.
So where can people find you or the things you're most enthusiastic about if they want to learn more about them? What are some resources?
So I already said degrowth.info about degrowth. Exploring economics for different schools of heterodox economics. And I think in German there's also a website called Plurale Ökonomik or so. They have also a really good list of different master's programs, which is awesome. For money and finance issues, I think Positive Money, that's like an NGO from the UK, is really cool. They have awesome publications and they're working on a lot of stuff. In Germany, there's Dezernat Zukunft for the German speakers. They do like socio-economic analyses of finance and are actually they're really in politics as well. Like, they're very well connected. It's really fascinating to see. Yeah, and of course you can always check out the website of my master's, SIEP, here at WU. In general, I think WU has, I mean, it's not the only place in Europe, but it has a lot of heterodox thought. Despite this being a very fancy business university, there's a surprising amount of heterodoxy and critical thinking here. That also goes for other places in Europe, of course, but I think that's good. And yeah, I mean, you can always write me on LinkedIn. I'll check my messages there. Just search for my name. I'm definitely always happy to answer questions if anything related to my field or something I could arguably give you a good answer to.
Amazing. Well, then the final question, what is your advice to future economists?
Yeah, I think probably I already said that before, right? I think this idea of like keep looking. There is people out there who do what you're interested in. Don't despair. It's a journey for everyone, I think, finding what they want to do, what makes them happy, what they're good at, what they think is important, and finding the people to do that with. But don't worry. I'd say be honest with yourself, be critical, also be respectful. I mean, like, try to understand other people's work and other people's life goals, and don't dismiss something that you don't properly understand yet. But in the end, also really listen to your heart, and whether you think what you're doing right now is what you want to do, what you think is right.
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Of course.
And have a great day.
Thank you, you too.